Hey everybody, I'm Katallina, and today we're here to talk about A Condition Called Love, Episode 8. People can say what they like about Hananoi, but there are two aspects of his character and his relationship with Hotaru that I think are really amazing and where I think that he actually does a really good job. The first of these are actually the idea that he is actually very patient and very consciously aware of the consequences of physical contact between the two. He can be a bit overboard with minor physical stuff like wanting to hug her or hold her hand or stuff like that, but he never seems to be in any big hurry to rush into doing more like lasting or permanent things, whether it's something that we in the West would think is as simple as a kiss, but which seems to mean a great deal more to these characters than it ever would to us, or anything else for that matter. I mean, I'm not surprised about not wanting to do other things that would be far more questionable. This show is meant for a specific type of audience, but the emphasis and patience on minor physical contact and the conscious decision to be very careful about choosing when the two characters will actually kiss not only builds an incredible amount of romantic chemistry between the two, both for them and for us as viewers, but also shows that regardless of any other shortcomings that Hananoi actually has, he does genuinely seem to respect Hotaru as a person and to be interested in her as an individual and not merely on some physical gratification level. The other thing that he does that I think is actually really good is that he's very good at balancing out her own insecurities about dating, considering that she's very new to this idea. Again, in this episode, we see her trying to sit him down and basically have like a business merger 101, trying to figure out concepts and rules for the relationship now that they've actually progressed it into actually being a formal boyfriend and girlfriend arrangement. And of course, poor Hananoi is like, what on earth does she mean? And he helps her figure out that what they're going to talk about this time is what they don't want the other person to do. And he actually turns the tables on her, asking her what it is she does not want from him. And she's like, question mark, question mark, question mark, and looks totally confused. Whereas he actually thinks about it for a minute. And the thing he says to her, which I thought was really beautiful, is, please don't leave me behind. Because, of course, Hananoi's greatest fear and the thing that drives a lot of his character and a lot of the things that drive people crazy about him is the idea that he has been constantly abandoned. Whether that is by his parents, whether that is by his own conscious decision to not really make friends, or whether it's by the likely death of his grandfather and the looming reality that his grandma is not going to be around forever. I mean, I don't think the show has actually made any direct implication toward this, but they're elderly. That's a given. That is something to be expected. And I mean, given that Hananoi has so much issue with people leaving or abandoning or not choosing him, I'm sure that's something that probably does weigh on his mind, especially when we think about what we learned in an earlier episode about how concerned he was when she burned her hand in his insistence of taking her to the hospital. He may talk about only really having concerns for one person, but I don't think that is inherently true. I do think he guards himself from new connections and that he's very cautious with them, but I think that he's probably somebody who cares incredibly deeply, almost possibly too deeply, when he cares about people. I think that the reason I'm so comfortable with him and he generally doesn't faze me is because these aspects of his character that I'm talking about here are things that I can relate to and that I can connect with for myself, because I'm somebody who does have a very close-knit and carefully selected circle of very close friends, and I'm somebody who does have a hard time letting people in on a deeper and more personal level. So I can get where he's coming from. There are things he does that I don't agree with as well, but in the circumstances I'm describing here, I can definitely get the point that he's trying to make, even if I do think he is struggling with it and that he does make mistakes here and there. What are those mistakes, though? Yeah, we can talk about that. Those would be the various jealous tendencies that we see, and we see quite a few of them throughout this episode. There are several things that he does where it's like, buddy, what on earth are you doing? We have this whole situation with the idea of him going and deciding he wants to work at the bookstore with Hotaru. And I mean, this could be taken in a variety of ways. This is actually one of the least egregious things in my opinion. It was interesting seeing her friends be like, wow, he's doing that. But I mean, we have to remember the fact that Hotaru actually decided to start working at the bookstore because she wanted to understand a hobby that was near and dear to Hananoi. And we know that he's been We know that he's been frequenting it since childhood from listening to what the manager tells us. So it's not entirely that he isn't interested in it or that he's insincere in any way, but he does admit that he wants to do it because he wants to spend more time with Hotaru. Much more concerning is the idea that he actually talks to that guy who calls her the different name because the dog has her name. And he tells the guy, like, hey, stay the hell away from her. I don't want you near her. That is not acceptable. That is very questionable behavior. And I mean, I could see that going in one of two ways. Either he is being insecure and he is being a bit manipulative and annoying, but he could mature out of it, or it could become a recurring pattern and she could end up very isolated, and that would be a legitimate and serious problem that even I, who like various dark tendencies and characters, would not approve of. On a slightly less egregious stance, we have the situation with the coffee can that he crushes when the guy tells Hotaru that he has a dog and that she and Kyo-chan could come and check it out. Because like half a second later he's like, you could come too, dude, which he may or may not have been meaning to say before the can got crushed. I mean, I don't even know whether the guy noticed or whether only we really noticed, because the sequence was emphasized for our viewing. Because of course that situation is meant to reconvey to the viewer the fact that Hananoi has these issues and that he does have these tendencies. These tendencies probably seem really annoying to some people, and they may even just make some people want to quit the show. But the thing is, this is a contemporary romance, which means that the romance is at the center of the story, and if something is at the center of the story, then it's going to need some form of conflict for the story to actually function and continue. If Hotaru and Hananoi were both perfect people who dated perfectly and who met every cultural expectation that we have for them, there really wouldn't be a story to tell here. And if the story was merely about trying to convince people that romanticism was bad, I wouldn't be covering it because I disagree with that emphatically. I remember being very concerned about that when I started this show and being very guarded about it. And what I will say is that I really like how they've handled showing both things where Hotaru is struggling with things and is trying to improve and is trying to do better, and showing the same thing for Hananoi and showing his struggles and his insecurities and the things that he needs to work on. I like the fact that both characters actually have things that need improving, and that it isn't all about it being one end or the other, because the idea of being in a relationship should be about both people building the other up and moving forward together. And I think we get a lot of that here, and I think they do a really good job. The last major flaw that Hananoi actually showed in this episode is that he feels envy of Hotaru's friendships with people like Kyo. And I mean, I can understand to an extent that since he hasn't actually worked to cultivate friendships of his own, that the idea that she has friends and wants to be with them and stuff probably does seem very annoying. But that shouldn't mean that he's trying to tear down or take her away from her friends. And to be abundantly clear, we haven't seen anything like that. If we did, I would be much more concerned and my stance would be very different. But what we do need to see, in my opinion, is for Hananoi to actually build better friendships and relationships. He doesn't need to have 50,000 people, but he absolutely should have another person outside of Hotaru that he shares things with, that he has time with, that he connects with, because that would probably actually really help him. And I know that's probably going to be very hard for him given his circumstances, given his personality, given what we've seen of him as a character, but it would be an improvement. As for trying to compete with Kyo-chan for Hotaru's attention and for her respect and everything else, that is a massive mistake. That is a car trying to race an airplane. You're never going to catch that, my dude, because that is a completely different kind of connection. Friendship and romance are incredibly different. I mean, ideally you do want to form friendship with the person you are romantically involved with. It leads to a much more reasonable and healthy connection that has different layers and that can help you resolve different issues. But actual friendship where that stuff isn't even on the table is incredibly different from being involved with somebody, because there are completely different expectations and behaviors and attitudes that each of those things actually carry out. And what did Hotaru do today that caught my attention, you might ask? Well, the thing I really loved that she was talking about when they were talking about her time spent with Kyo and the effort that they've actually been like having as friends and everything and their past and all that, is the idea that For Hotaru, the happiness of the people she cares about becomes her own happiness. And I really loved that they gave her this idea and this value, because it stands in stark contrast to what Hananoi said in an earlier episode when they were at a shrine, where he was basically like, God has never done anything for me. And I don't even necessarily see that as a strictly religious or even like singularly religious statement. I see that more so as the idea of the glass being half full or the glass being half empty. I think that the idea that other people's happiness becomes my happiness is so much more of a beautiful and positive way to look at things, whereas the idea that God has never done anything for me not only discredits any great things that somebody already has in their life, be those material or be those relationships, family, successes, or anything else, but it also puts forward the idea that this person wants something to do something for them. They want to get something from someone or something else, rather than to either celebrate someone else's goodness or to give something. And that's just a much more negative stance to have on things, and I can see how that would lead to disappointment. Anyway, I thought this episode was really solid, and the last thing I want to say is I thought it was interesting seeing everyone looking at those yearbooks and realizing that they were all in the same classes earlier when they were in elementary. And it was interesting because we saw Hananoi actually like implying that he may have made some kind of mistake in the past, and it'll be interesting to see just what that might actually end up being, because I wonder if there is actually some kind of connection between all these characters that they either don't remember or that each of them had a different part in and the others aren't aware. This could create some kind of mystery for this show to solve, which would be a really great addition, because as I've been saying, with the romance being at the center and the romance being the only thing being used to do plot structure, it puts a lot more pressure on each of the characters to actually bring issues to the table that are going to create story to push it forward. Having something like this will allow us to potentially have the characters take a few more steps forward, while having something outside of the present to actually be able to elevate what's going on in the plot, which would definitely be a net positive. Anyway, I'd love to know what you guys thought of this one, so feel free to drop a comment below and let me know, and I'll see you in the next video. Talk to you later. Bye!